Feels like in the past couple years, mystery shows have really come on vogue, and I don't think it's a fad. I think TV studios are going to be pumping these out for a long time to come. They command attention and discussion, and make for very satisfying stories as long as they're constructed well. And in the animation scene, you've probably heard the term lore show, either positively or negatively, to describe any show with a focus on drama, backstories, story arcs, perfect 8 to 14 material for our 18 to 34 crowd. And here, for the next 40 minutes or so, you're gonna hear me review what many would say is the gold standard for lore shows and mystery television, Gravity Falls. I've been hearing folks rave about this show for 12 years, and it's always bummed me out because I have this mental block from being able to commit to animated lore shows. My cousins watched it and talked about it. The only episode I fully watched, the first, I really liked, but I felt very sheepish about scaling this kind of mountain. Part of my mind has always said, this is a live action thing, which I know now is an unfair and regressive way of compartmentalizing genres. Animation can do more than we give it credit for. And being able to pull off an epic coming-of-age story with sci-fi, fantasy, and occult flavors is no easy feat. But by some miracle, Gravity Falls made it look easy. The history of this show is short but storied. The creator, Alex Hirsch, was inspired to work in animation by a show called The Simpsons. Fascinated by how a cartoon could offer stories funnier and deeper than contemporary live-action offerings, he went to CalArts in the 2000s, arguably the most prestigious animation school in the world. Its alumni is nothing to scoff at. Soon, Alex found himself working on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack for Cartoon Network, created by Throp Van Orman. I happened to review this show earlier this year, and hinted in that video that Alex was one of many crew members with a bright future ahead of him. After Flapjack, he moved to Disney Television Animation to work on Fishhooks, but in 2010, the year that show premiered, he was called upon to offer a show to pitch to the studio. So he dusted off one of his student films at CalArts, made an 11-minute pilot out of it, and it was picked up. Two major changes to the final product were that most episodes would be 22 minutes, and Alex and his team had to fight with Disney's standards and practices all the time over content. What was too violent? What was too suggestive? Ultimately, some moments were a little compromised to fit the totally uncontroversial Disney brand, but not everything. Gravity Falls premiered on June 15, 2012, and really took the world of DTVA by storm. It was pretty much their big breakthrough into the 2010s. Phineas and Ferb was still going and beloved, but that started in 2007. And they'd made some shows earlier in the decade, but those were more niche and mostly quite obscure now. This show, on the other hand, took them and their audience into a new world of possibilities. So imagine the shock when the second season was moved to Disney XD. This was a death sentence for the ratings, but the buzz around this show stayed stronger than ever. We were approaching an age where ratings stopped mattering for a show's future anyway, but still, this second season would prove to be the last. Not out of any sort of mismanagement, but because Alex felt they'd told the story he wanted to and didn't want to go further than was needed. February 15th, 2016 saw the end of the grand finale, but there have still been some shorts and books to keep the fanbase busy. And who knows, maybe this latest book is a sign that a revival's on the way. Before this analysis gets started, I'd just like to put up a spoiler warning. From this point forward, Season 1 will be reviewed unspoiled, then when I get to Season 2, at this point in the video, that season will be unspoiled. Without further ado...
In Gravity Falls, there is no one you can trust. No one you can trust. Hello!
Dipper and Mabel Pines are a pair of twin siblings who are spending their summer vacation in Gravity Falls, a mysterious town off the map in Oregon where strange events are alleged to happen, but the guy they're staying with, their great uncle Stan, denies such superstition while profiting off it with his gift shop, the Mystery Shack. But Dipper soon finds a book containing myths and legends about Gravity Falls, all of which turn out to be true. So the hunt is on for the journal's writer and an adventurous summer. One of the genres I ascribed to this show a couple minutes ago was coming of age, mainly because Dipper and Mabel are 12 going on 13 throughout the show. There is this feeling that the journeys they go on throughout the summer are maturing them, little by little. They get a wiser perspective on family, relationships, appearances, time. Few episodes are just a bunch of random things that happen to them, and most add to valuable experiences. But individually, the twins are quite different characters. Dipper is inquisitive but cautious. He knows that he's in a lot of trouble whenever he goes on one of these adventures, but is doing it for the answers. Basically, Dipper is living in palpable fear all summer, but gains the courage to get through it with friendship and knowledge. I think Dipper's a great, well-rounded hero, and one of the easiest characters to relate to. Many will see him as the de facto protagonist, given he takes the most initiative of this pair, but I think they deserve equal billing. Their personalities, attitudes, and struggles are given more equal focus than some have given credit. Mabel is much more energetic than her brother, always up for fun and games, while also being on the hunt for a summer romance. A lot of you were waiting eagerly for what I'd have to say about her because there's no consensus on the internet. Either she's a fun, funny character who adds some levity to the tone of the show, or she's in your face, selfish to Dipper too often, and never gets hit with hard truths until it's too late. But I'm a Mabel defender. You heard it here first. Sure, she can be a handful, but that's child characters. I think she goes through enough to where it's clear these were valuable experiences by the end. Great Uncle Stanford Pines isn't exactly a great uncle, which I bet is why the twins just call him Grunkle Stan. This guy is anything but scrupulous. He sees his own mystery shack as nothing more than a hollow tourist trap, and while he does care about his great niece, nephew, and employees, he doesn't show it. As one of the characters voiced by show creator Alex Hirsch, I can see he took the lead of Dan Povenmire saying, "Okay, I'll voice a lead on my show, as long as they're a jaded older guy enveloped in petty schemes." Hilarious character, but once the cynical demeanor settles in, that's where they have to shake things up, and I think they do so with flying colors. Zeus is one of the 3 employees at the Mystery Shack, and pretty much Stan's handyman, the Grunkle's grunt. He's a big lad with an innocent little brain, so gets along well with the twins, no matter what they're up to. We see more into Zeus's life as the show goes on, but I think he makes a helpful presence from the start. I guess if you don't count Mabel, Zeus is the show's go-to plucky comic relief. Wendy is the other employee there, only a part-time cashier, but would rather be out with her teen friends doing teen stuff. Dipper develops a crush on her, but she just sees him as a friend. I know. Ouch, but there is a 3-year age gap between them, and I see Wendy as more than just a love interest. She's Dipper's guide on how to act socially after his next birthday. Let loose, don't be nervous. Mabel's able to make friends too, Grenda and Candy. They meet during a party and bond over feeling like outsiders in this town. It's inferred that Grenda's unpopular for being loud and burly, while Candy's so for being quiet and shy. Side by side, they seem like they've made for a solid comedy pair-up already, and while their moments to shine separate from Mabel are brief, they're worth it to see what Mabel considers a friend, usually the honest folks. And pigs. Mabel wins Waddles at a fair around the halfway point of season 1, and although he does little narratively, look at how cute he is. That is one innocent smile, and Waddles is one cheerful fixture of the show. It wouldn't be the same without him popping up with a wild new costume now and again. Of the many townies in Gravity Falls, secondary characters who'll chime in with their own gimmicks, one I want to spotlight is Old Man McGucket, a senile reclusive hick who's pretty hard to take seriously. But you will come to know him better as the show goes on. I'll admit, I saw him gaining a stronger presence in the narrative, but wasn't prepared for what they were going to say about him. On the sliding scale of adversarial characters, Wendy's boyfriend Robbie, a depressed punk, would rank low. But he is a big obstacle in the way of Dipper reaching the fabled "seriously dude, this wouldn't work out" talk. Basically, if you're younger than Robbie, you'd know the struggle. If you're the same age or older, you'd know he's a pitiable jerk. But since he's voiced by TJ Miller, I've got a JPEG on standby that can completely defang him for everyone.
You want to get into it, huh? Let's get into it, kid. You think I don't know what's been going on, huh? It's obvious you've got a thing for my girlfriend, don't you? don't you?
A comparable rival for Mabel would be Pacifica, the popular girl in town who's only so spoiled and rich because it runs in the family. Makes you wonder why they even live in Gravity Falls if they're so much further up the class ladder. Just to make the rest of the town feel inferior? Well, also because their mansion was built here. Pacifica isn't as snobbish as her parents about it, just a bit used to the snobbery. That could change though. Little Gideon is a big step up from Pacifica in villainy, being even more spoiled, randomly considered this treasured darling of the town. He's accumulated so much power that he can use it to intimidate anyone he wants, leading to more power in an endless cycle. Sweet on the outside, but sour on the inside. Gideon functions as the main antagonist of the first season, being one of the few residents of Gravity Falls to understand the mysteries going on, and wanting to hone that to his advantage. A less prominent but equally dangerous foe would be Blendon, a time agent from the distant future who runs afoul of Dipper and Mabel while trying to fix the past. Now, when you get a look at how horrible his dystopian time period is, you do feel a bit bad that this is the menial labor he has to do, and he can't even do that without some 21st century kids messing it up for him. It's a cool, futuristic kind of pathetic. The most sinister thing about Blendon is his voice, which could get grating if you aren't stuck in 2017. But all of these people are angels compared to the most powerful antagonist of the show, Bill Cipher, a sadistic triangle from beyond the stars who offers nifty deals with the small costs of free minds or the fabric of reality, stuff like that. Bill Cipher has really taken off and become a symbol all his own, and while he only has one major appearance in Season 1, so I'm still saving some details for the Season 2 part, he's a powerful character in-universe and in the effect he has on his audience. And that's a good chunk of the cast. Who else have we got? Lazy Eye Susan, middle-aged lady with a diner, the two cops who may be arrogant and pig-headed but can't live without each other. Besides Bill, they all feel very tied to the world they're playing in. Sure, Dipper and Mabel are out-of-towners, but they slip right in as soon as Dipper gets the journal. But what about this Oregon town makes it the second most thrilling Oregon town in contemporary fiction?
We were on the lookout for two kids who might be reading.
We're hunting them down for secret reasons. Woo! Derp.
The show never hides its mystery theming. After all, the base of operations is the Mystery Shack, later rebranded the Mystery Hack, George Stapler style. Now, who might the Mystery Hack be? But seriously, these scripts offer a couple questions about this world that never get answered. How does the Mystery Shack get any customers with how obscure it is? I personally chalk that up to destiny. What brought these people and their families together to such a location? That could be destiny or coincidence. But some questions do get answers across the span of the show's run. Why is Old Man McGucket so McGucky? That'll take some time, but it's a satisfying payoff. Maybe all stereotypical hick-town geezers have the same backstory, we just don't care to listen. This show can be pretty dark too. Horror beings like zombies and ghosts seep in occasionally, and the stakes raise pretty high pretty frequently. Dipper is about to die every other episode. It's mad he goes through all of this in under 3 months. This even bleeds into the comedy. You can tell these writers had studied The Simpsons cover to cover because the sense of humor in Gravity Falls is very comparable to that of Our Favorite Family. Character-driven gags, observational quips, the most incisive joke writing that we never thought to put to paper. But when it gets referential, it's usually much more contemporary affairs than classic Simpsons went for. And the only major difference is how they get away with it. Just about. Like I mentioned earlier, Alex Hirsch has shared some fascinating censor notes he got from Disney about content they thought went too far, which gives the impression of a show that's working much harder under the limitations it has. A presenter on a top-secret tape saying that he needs to be shot after finishing his part is very Simpsons. Him learning that he's actually safe from that fate is the Gravity Falls cushioning. Still dark by Disney standards, but there's more to the joke now. As for how they handle story arcs and character development, pretty well. They're the same characters through and through across the show. It's not about radically changing who they are, but learning more about why they are that way. Insight can be powerful, but it's most effective when given at the right time and the right circumstances. Time to comment on the art and animation, and this is one of my first 2010s shows that you can describe under the blanket term of CalArt style, if you're lazy. For one thing, these 2010s character design trends aren't what this already baseless term originally referred to. Now, I will submit that there are commonalities in design trends among a few of the most popular animated series of the decade. You know, big beanbag-shaped heads with rounded facial features. I don't want to overemphasize those elements because the internet 6 years ago did that enough, but the head designs work here for the purpose of expression, and these characters have firmly designed bodies too that convey how they behave and can move. The backgrounds and special effects are very detailed and immersive. You feel like these are all real places that can house major events. The color palette is gorgeous too. I'll remember it as being a very green and red show. That's how the trees are often rendered. It can give the show more of an autumn vibe sometimes, or a wistful nostalgic tone, like memories. I love the look of the intro too. It feels like one of the last in animation to be considerably higher quality than the show it's leading into. Only potential issue with these could be some slight false advertising, like this shot of Dipper is lovely, but has the Marge turning problem of, do you expect them to move like this in the show all the time? Stan's motions at the campfire are much more subtle, and therefore I feel more effective at conveying what the show will look like.
Well, time to invade Stan's mind. This should be fun. Remember, reality is an illusion, the universe is a hologram. Buy gold, buy!
Season 1 is great. It's got a breezy tone despite the supernatural elements. This is a summer vacation after all, not to Disneyland or Hawaii or anywhere disappointing like that, just somewhere small, rural, and fascinating. You quickly get a feel for how the twins can make the most of it. Mabel quickly, Dipper eventually. But all these teen activities and fleeting summer romances are just one half to their stay in Gravity Falls. There's the paranormal half to sink your teeth into, and a lot of this stuff is awesome too. I say a lot rather than all because A, I want to be modest, and B, not all of it's gonna stick with you in Season 1. Its episodic nature means not all of them are essential. There's a few adventures I care less for than others, but this is the nature of television. Every episode is different, and we're all attracted to our favorites. And I tend to like the ones with a greater sense of tension more. Show us how ominous this place is. Let Dipper, and Mabel to an extent, be more heroic. If you've only seen the first season and hopped off before the second, I wouldn't blame you for thinking little Gideon is the show's major antagonist. They give him a fair bit of focus back here, hammering it into you that these famous, likable entities around you ain't what they're cracked up to be, and might be using you for their own gain. Gideon is billed as a psychic, but that's only because of a little trick he calls mass surveillance. Don't meet your heroes, especially if you don't even consider them heroes. Little Gideon is the animated embodiment of this meme. The last few episodes signal a more open-ended way forward for the show, with more paranormal and intense situations, but one of the few recurring story arcs, the Dipper, Wendy, Robbie love triangle, is given a shake-up. Wendy breaks it off with Robbie, but she gets mad at Dipper for not taking her feelings into account afterwards. Spoiler warning for Season 2 for the rest of the video, you may click out now. This is patched up quickly.
What's the deal with this portal? Why did you keep this a secret?
And what happened between you and your brother?
I'm hoping all this aligns exactly with my fanfic, Stan. If not, I will be very disappointed.
Season 2 is a very different beast from 1. Some episodes are more of the same Monster of the Week ordeals, but most of them are here to push a narrative forward. Robbie's out of the picture, but Wendy still has to let Dipper down easy. There's more to Seuss, we see his mother more, get a taste of his dating life, and figure out why his dad isn't around. It doesn't make Mr. Ramirez a sympathetic figure in the slightest, but it still builds character for Seuss. The character who's fleshed out the most in Season 2, however, is undoubtedly Grunkle Stan. In Season 1, there's a trend of him just missing out on the supernatural events and going on as always. But he isn't like Linda from Phineas and Ferb. He's sometimes able to see what's going on. He just downplays it and pretends not to care. For what reason? He knows something. He goes to a big machine underneath the Mystery Shack that's creating a portal. And what's on the other side? Stanford Pines. The real Stanford Pines. His estranged twin brother who's been dimension hopping to find a way to defeat Bill Cipher. Pretty big plot twist, eh? But also the basis for one of my favorite flashback episodes in all of television. But what I love about this is that it explains in detail why Grunkle Stanley, as he's now called, became such a jaded figure without ruining who he is or retroactively turning him into a villain. He does almost say son of a bitch in a Disney show, and that's awesome. This is still the greedy shyster we've come to know and love, and still the caring Grunkle who only wanted to protect Dipper and Mabel from danger, but now we know he felt inferior to his brother Stanford growing up, and has spent his adulthood jumping around shaky business ventures, and that's made him protective of his family and the Mystery Shack. But as for Stanford Pines, or Ford as he's nicknamed, he doesn't spend long on the show, but his impact is fantastic. Stern and brave, he makes for a more conventional hero than Stanley, which is what they need as the show approaches its endgame. He was the guy who wrote the journals, he's who Dipper's been trying to find all summer, so no duh, Dipper's gonna geek out and want to spend as much time with him as possible. It's like he's just dropped into the show and already got a history here. He's brothers with Stanley, has a rapport with Dipper, and a personal connection to Bill Cipher. Somehow, they dropped a new character 9 episodes from the finale, who's fully formed and ready to move and shake. Time in this back half to chill out and explore Gravity Falls is available, but not without the looming threat of what happens if this device is broken. A few episodes later, you've got Mabel sad that the summer's almost over, which made it no surprise when Alex Hirsch announced the show would be ending a few months after this episode's airing. But what were they going out with? Maybe Mabel doing something rash and almost ending the existence of the whole town. What are they gonna do?
It's the end of the world.
The final 3 episodes of Season 2 form the Weird Mageddon trilogy. One part exploration of Bill Cipher's wacky dystopian reign over Gravity Falls, one part a sibling conflict between Dipper and Mabel over how to confront their anxieties, and one part hour-long string of epic showdowns. No early surprise that a couple of these will rank among my favorite episodes, so I'll go more into each of them in a few minutes. But for an overall assessment, I respect the guts these people had to go all the way in such a quick span. It all really elevates Bill Cipher to being one of the most sinister magic Disney villains, up there in the history books with Maleficent and the Horned King. I like to think the weird Mageddon he's conjured up is significantly more horrific than what's being shown on screen, but since we're following the POV of 12-year-olds, we're seeing a way tamed back perception of the events. The protagonist's POV is important to consider in the text of any story, and the Weird Mageddon trilogy is using it as a filter for a more gnarly and occult adventure that Disney would not have let them pursue otherwise. This show must have been really exciting to see unfold in real time in the early to mid 2010s, but it honestly wasn't any less great watching it through the first time long after it aired. I have no FOMO. I like to wait for the dust to settle before throwing my hat into the ring of anything. But how about those best and worst lists? Well, because I love this show so much, and it's so short, I'm gonna do another ranking of every episode from my least favorite to my favorite. I haven't done something like this on this scale since Quack Pack. Both of these shows are necessary circumstances. Starting with my least favorite episode, Dipper vs. Manliness. It's serviceable but unspectacular. Doesn't say anything wrong about masculinity or individuality, but at the same time, nothing new. Mabel and Stan's plot is there to fill time, but I actually think it's more interesting than the A-plot. The Legend of the Gobblewonker encounters those second episode blues, where you've been sucked in by the first, but the following one doesn't have as much pressure on it, and it shows. There is a sweet message to value your time with your elders, and Stan's boomer joke hits it out of the park. And its aim is still getting better. Carpe Diem is our body swap episode. It's good, and even had the potential to be one of my favorites of the first season, but I thought it got really unfocused by the time they brought Grenda and Candy into it. Boss Mabel is just a strange idea for an episode, even by this show's standards. Stan puts Mabel in charge and she has to learn to run a tight ship. It works, it makes a point about how leadership can work when it isn't tempted by extremes, but there were a lot of other episodes I preferred by this point. The hand that rocks the Mabel, sorry about putting all these early Mabel episodes in a row by the way, is the first major appearance of little Gideon, important for establishing who he is by building a relationship between him and Mabel that's as phony as his act turns out to be. Boys Crazy is like 13 years late to the satire, and that's what I like about it. If they're on Disney Channel, it's never too late to make fun of manufactured pop bands. I like this rigmarole of Mabel getting super protective of this helpless boy band, but the B-plot of Dipper thinking Robbie's trying to brainwash Wendy with music is weaker as a B-plot and could have been its own episode. The deep end is the swimming pool episode with the merman, Mermando. Good, it's got a lot of memorable elements right from the word go, but like Boys Crazy, I like Mabel's plot, but wish the rest of the plots could have been stronger. They're funnier, which is why I'm putting this episode higher. The Love God has Mabel playing matchmaker and trying to fix Wendy and Robbie's circle of friends, with dangerous tools and little success. This is the lowest ranking season 2 episode, but it's still very good, just a bit more sitcom-y than you'd be used to by this point in the show. Little Dipper is like a reintroduction to Gideon. The illusion of him being this benign figure in the community is gone. Now he wants to get Dipper and Mabel out of the way while they work through Dipper's issues of inferiority in the sibling dynamic. It's a simple episode in that way, with a typical animation gimmick. Fight Fighters is one of their big video game episodes, this one being an homage to Street Fighter and other 90s fighting games. If you want to know my experience with Street Fighter, there was a cabinet of the second game at a soccer club I used to go to, but I never had the coins for it, so I just grabbed the joystick and buttons and mimicked what I saw on the attract mode. That was fun. Much later, I happened upon a cabinet at another place, but it had money this time. I picked Guile, and got my butt handed to me by Blanca. Fight Fighters brought back memories. The Stanchurian candidate feels like a Season 1 holdover, with its smaller scale and the presence of Gideon, now worming his way out of jail. But the fact that he and Dipper and Mabel are using mind control to improve their standings in an election tells us that this is a line they shouldn't cross and should make up for. Tourist Trapped, the first episode, is a great time, even if it's inevitable you're gonna find another favorite after it. After a corny... Yep. That's me. You're probably wondering intro, you get a strong introduction to what this show will be like and how it'll test your expectations regularly. Dungeons, Dungeons, and more Dungeons is their Dungeons and Dragons episode. I'm already sick of talking about dungeons. But not this episode. It's a great way to give Dipper and Ford a common interest and an adventure pertaining to it. Dipper and Mabel versus the future isn't as high as it could have been, and that's because I do think what Mabel does could have painted her in a more sympathetic light, but I still think they did their best, warming us up for the end and making us feel just as sad as Mabel that it's coming. Weird Mageddon got off on the right chaotic foot. Summerween was a sneaky little Halloween romp placed in a show set in summer. This place is weird, why can't their traditions be? It's really about Dipper becoming embarrassed at the idea that trick-or-treating is becoming too childish for him, and testing his rapport with Mabel through that, baby steps towards a deeper exploration later in the show. Irrational Treasure fleshes out the past of this backwater nation by revealing a conspiracy about the Northwest family and a president erased from history for being a little too detached from reality. You know me, I don't like getting political, so I'll just say this is a fun romp. Way more than less than worthless. The Gulf War tells us that even mini-golf is gonna lead to something silly in Gravity Falls. This is an important step in Pacifica's character development, being the point where she can genuinely start to tolerate Mabel, or anyone outside her own wealthy bubble. Did I mention this episode has sentient golf balls? The inconveniencing is a strong start to Dipper's confidently unconfident friendship with Wendy. This plays more into a teen-oriented horror setting, with these fine hoodlums here exploring an abandoned building with some very old people serving as the menace. Only the preteen here can save them, in a begrudging fashion. Roadside Attraction has Dipper do the unthinkable, follow dating advice from Stan. It could have gone better for him. I really enjoy the road trip angle of this one, and them pairing Candy up with Dipper, showing that you don't have to remember her and Grenda as satellite characters to Mabel. Bridging the middle of the list is the anthologies, with Little Gift Shop of Horrors being the lower one. I like every segment, but I'm not as interested in the framing device here as the one for Bottomless Pit. Also, it doesn't have Grunkle Stunkle winning the Funkle Bunkle. You can easily see these were inspired by The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes, but whereas those started off as an annual pass for The Simpsons to get more scary and surreal, Gravity Falls was like that from the off, so while refreshing in their pace, these are still 3 shorter tales for the price of one big one. Sock Opera is a Bill Cipher episode, so of course it's worth watching. It poses a compelling question about Dipper's share in the sibling relationship, and whether Mabel tends to take advantage of him, but it reaches its climax with a sock puppet show, so you know it's taking itself seriously enough. Weird Mageddon 2, Escape from Reality, is one of the most vibrant episodes of the show, but also one of the most sinister. The gist is that Bill's trapped Mabel in a utopian paradise where she never has to confront growing up, and she's ready to extend the same euphoria to her brother and buddies. Even though you could say this is another rash thing they're letting her off the hook for, they dedicate enough time to working through her anxieties regarding life to where they honestly feel punishing enough. The Time Traveler's Pig has a lot going for it. It's our introduction to Waddles, our introduction to Blendin, and a wacky time travel romp where Dipper hopelessly finagles with the timeline to have a good day with Wendy, and Mabel starts liberation somewhere in the middle. A jolly old day at the fair, with a harsh lesson about needing to live with your mistakes if they can't be controlled. Blendin's game sees more time travel shenanigans, but with a lot more heart than last time. For one thing, Dipper and Mabel have to go through some futuristic challenges to make up for being somewhat reckless in the past, and they learn more about Seuss's childhood and what's up with his family situation. Pardon the pun, but it's able to blend 2 tonal extremes together very well. Land Before Swine was the first step towards Stan showing a heart, making up for something bad he did to Waddles. That's a good chap. No enemy of Waddles should be an enemy of the audience. You've also got Old Man McGucket messing around on this dinosaur adventure, keeping him in the picture for something coming soon. Headhunters is one of the greats. You might not agree, but with how this one starts off as a mundane investigation and then pivots to a supernatural element, this is a worthwhile introductory episode to the show for a newbie if they can't watch the first for whatever reason. It also feels the most like those Simpsons episodes where Bart and Lisa solve a mystery, like Sideshow Bob Roberts or The Day the Violins Died. I always wanted more of those, so this random episode of a different show quenches my hunger. The last Mabelcorn has magic horses. Obviously, I had to give it some consideration for a high place on the list. But it has a funny story about some jerkish creature that pretends to be a perfectionist just so it can be left alone to wallow in its own fabricated image of perfectionism. Perfection doesn't exist, so why bother with these snooty people if they clearly aren't living up to their own standards? At least Mabel gets to do a plethora of good deeds through this journey, and that should be its own reward. Double Dipper, the other clone episode. A bit more conventional, but a hilarious time nevertheless. Dipper arguing with narrow-minded reflections of himself makes him come to terms with his own obsessions, namely with making sure he can be as close to Wendy as possible. I've already been over why this episode is so great in another video, so to shed more light on the B-plot, it is a big stepping stone for Mabel and her world in Gravity Falls. Grenda, Candy, and Pacifica all show up to the party, and they all form a new dynamic for her here. Northwest Mansion Mystery gets down to business. Like Double Dipper, it's another episode set at a party, albeit a much more lavish one. Dipper goes on a ghost hunt with Pacifica to relieve her family's mansion of this haunting spirit, but he comes to regret it when he realizes the ghost has a good reason to hold a grudge with the Northwests for so many generations. This is the one with the big hints that Pacifica isn't going to follow in her family's footsteps, and while this development isn't followed through on in great detail, it is saying to reflect on your position in the world if you're this privileged. Gideon Rises, the first season finale. Look at this little man and tell me you predicted Mecha. Beyond this dramatic bombshell, you've got the possibility of Dipper and Mabel having to leave the summer early, and them wringing a lot of emotion out of that. This would be a good place for a hope spot. Never give up and all that junk. But the cliffhanger, man. As if the mystery behind the journal couldn't get any bigger, they left their audience with this for nearly a full year. Where'd Mageddon 1? I am not pronouncing that. If I get it wrong, that could offend someone. This changes the fabric of the show inside out for a fiery end. Here's but a taste of the anarchy Bill and his interdimensional posse can create, with the threat that it could grow even more widespread. Would now be a good time to admit I've never seen any of the Mad Max movies? Would right after that be a good time to say that doesn't matter to my enjoyment of this motif in the latter half? Scaryoke kicks season 2 off by keeping some promises from the first. That even though last season's premiere used the zombie genre as a red herring, that this one would play it completely straight. And I like where they go with it here, not as bloody or fatal as it could have been, which is fine for a show partly aimed at kids, and it lets Zeus become a zombie and make the most passive observations about the lifestyle. This episode's also a turning point in Dipper and Stan's relationship, not that it's followed through on until the back half of the season, but it makes for great drama here. Society of the Blind Eye puts a more cynical spin on Gravity Falls and the nature of its residents. It reveals that they aren't totally oblivious to the happenings, but instead that they choose to live in denial by having their memories wiped on a regular basis. The big reveal that Old Man McGucket used to be one of the top scientists in the town before he had a hand in its descent, hitting himself the worst of all, is morbid in a lot of ways. If I had to apply a routine yet grippingly conveyed life lesson to this, it's don't live in denial. A man is the sum of his memories. Dreamscapers marks the physical debut of Bill Cipher, so is always going to hit home in its spectacle. The show has delivered a lot of out there concepts already, but once this triangle's slotted into place, the possibilities really become infinite. The exploration of Stan's mind is a fantastic place to go after this, hitting it out of the park with both style and themes. And while it has no bearing on later plots, much like Scaryoke, this is the first time they make a beefy plot out of Dipper's negative feelings towards his uncle, and allows him to work through them and discover something about him. Not what he seems is all build up to a better episode, but also payoff. This is the big one that really makes the twins question if Stan has been a more evil character this whole time. Okay, beyond being generally shady. The climax is gripping, it puts the name of the town and the whole dang show to good use, and culminates in the debut of Ford. That throws an even bigger wrench into things, and I'm sure the wait for the next episode must have been painful on the fanbase at the time. But I don't have to deal with that wait as a 2024 first-timer. We all know now the following episode has some answers. Zeus and the Real Girl is not the following episode, but it's the second season's video game episode. They get Zeus hooked on a dating sim that then haunts a children's pizza parlor. They could not have known about Five Nights at Freddy's when this episode entered production, and Doki Doki Literature Club also twisting the dating sim genre into horror was still a few years away. This really had its pulse on what gamers wanted. A substitute for a girlfriend. But seriously, it's great that Zeus has someone after the events of this episode, even if it's a shame that Melody didn't become a recurring character. Weird Mageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, benefits from me counting this last part as a full hour-long episode. So it's at an unfair advantage, but hey, it's the finale. It's a valuable part of any TV show. There's a lot of awesome character moments to unpack here, too many for me to go in depth with. But highlights are Bill's villainous motives being revealed, seeking the third dimension, Stan giving up his mind to destroy Bill along with it. Briefly, we can't be too sad here. And the 13th birthdays of Dipper and Mabel. Their preteenhood is over, but not the fun. And golly do those last few minutes make you feel good, like you've really been through something. Into the Bunker is often considered the darkest episode, and while I have my vote for Society of the Blind Eye for its social commentary, this is still an intense one. Really pushes that Y7 rating as far as it can go. We're on the verge of a G rating here, people. The kids and Man-Kid are in the bowels of the, at this point, mysterious author's bunker, where they have to fight an eldritch shapeshifter. They could have done a shapeshifting plot in any way at any time, but I couldn't be happier to see them make it right at the start of a new chapter for the show and as threatening and thrilling as possible. This also marks the end to the early stretch of Dipper and Wendy's dynamic, which I'd say was a good call right around the halfway point of the run. No need to keep dragging it out beyond this point. A Tale of Two Stands is my favourite episode of Gravity Falls, and no other episode stood a chance. Much like Mageddon 3, it has a slight runtime advantage, being an extended 29-minute event, but every second of this thing is worth it. After a whole episode making you question Stan, A Tale of Two Stands settles the score and makes him a much more sympathetic figure. Mistakes were made between both Stans, you can't deny that. But through this elaborate flashback through Stanley and Stanford's lives so far, it puts a new level of importance on Dipper and Mabel's relationship to each other. Little Dipper or Sock Opera could have been their perpetual motion machine incident, but they're getting the guidance and wisdom that Stanley and Ford didn't. It's a masterful example of what Gravity Falls does best of all, deliver compelling stories. So yeah, only 40 episodes, but this review ended up being this long. There was so much to pick apart, and there's still more left. You might know I like to stay brief on these, but Gravity Falls was a show that demanded, and still demands, a lot of attention and speculation. To be honest, this review took so long, and was so long, because I didn't want to stop writing about this show. It's truly one of the best I've ever seen. And I feel very sympathetic towards the fans for having this fantastic adventure to treasure, and then it left with everyone wanting more. But it knew what it wanted to do and stuck to it, which gives it far more integrity than a majority of stuff on television. If the Book of Bill is more than just a Charlie-sponsored omen and more Gravity Falls is on the way, that would be cool, but look, I don't like to be the cynical type about distant continuations, but after all this time, how can they live up to this? I'd like to be proven wrong, not everything could be as it seems.